Hi everybody, it's Cash. Welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. This has been a very strange week. Not only did Britain get a new Prime Minister in Liz Truss, but also we lost the Queen. And I think if you are not British, it's very, very hard to understand how profoundly monumental that is. I wouldn't say I'm a follower of the royal family. I'm not really terribly interested. But the woman was on the throne when I was born. She outlived both my parents. In fact, my father died in May. And it kind of passed without a glitch, really. Whereas this, the death of Queen Elizabeth II, feels really, really monumental. Now, obviously, we get a new king, which is different than simply putting a new face on stamps or on money or that kind of thing. This is a change. This is a step forward for Britain after a lot of stability, because this woman, no matter what happened in the rest of the world, she was always there. And now she's not there. I did Prince Charles's pictures last year. And I don't know if you even remember those, but he was going down lots of little corridors, slightly lost, and then the road zigzagged ahead of him till he reached a black curtain, the death of his mother. And when he peered under the curtain to see what lay in store for him, there were 3 blinding spotlights. Of course, he's now King Charles III. And Camilla Parker Bowles becomes Queen Consort. Out of the glare of those spotlights, when he carried on, it led to an open door and a sunny vista, and obviously the opportunity to be monarch. And he's waited a very, very long time for that. So many people said, would I do transition pictures for the Queen? I did her pictures a while back, and if you remember, there was a wall and there were lots of red buttons on the wall, each representing an element of her duties, because this was an incredibly conscientious, dutiful, protocol-adhering type person. She didn't want to let the country down. All her life she had served. But at some point, the buttons got grey, indistinct, and she had to let go of a lot of her duties and delegate them to Prince William and Prince Charles. When it looked like she was irretrievably sick, I went into her energy again. And there was a large stone wall, a bit like the Western Wall in Jerusalem, but made of granite. It was very grey and imposing. And she stepped up to the wall, and it didn't move out of her way. And she went, "Really? This is it?" She was not used to losing control. Not being in charge, of having people say no to her. So when the universe said no, it felt like a different sensation to her. This is it. That really is it. So obviously life was drawing to a close. And she moved left. Left always means something new. She moved left, and there was a corridor. She didn't want to go down this corridor, but it was the only way to go. And it got dark. And darkness became blackness. And she wandered into the blackness and vanished. So clearly it was imminent. Then I heard that she had died, which is a staggering development. I was quite emotional. Very surprising. But I thought, I wonder if I can follow her through, whether I should follow her through, into that metaphorical cave I always see, that doesn't really exist, but it's a symbolic representation of what people are feeling after they cross. But it's the Queen. So I followed her through. There were two really interesting things about the pictures that came of her crossover. The first one was that she was, in her consciousness, bent over. She was 96, she wasn't well, but she was bent over, and as I watched, she straightened up, grew taller, and came into her own once again. The youthfulness returned, which is what happens. The consciousness is still kind of wired into the physical restrictions. But eventually those go too, because you realize you don't have a body and you feel better. The second element that was there that I've not seen in anybody else's pictures was a cord. There was a cord that ran out of her back and into the wall she'd come from, whatever that was. But there was a cord. And as she stood up, that cord remained. And it stayed with her as she began to move around this symbolic space. This, I think, was her tie, maybe to the bloodline of royalty, but more likely to her duties, her sense of responsibility to the nation. When that is ground into your consciousness, after you die, it's still there because it's who you are. It is your very soul identity. And she moved on, not necessarily willingly, because she was starting to feel, what I felt anyway, alone. When you're the monarch of any country, there is a vast support system. Somebody you can call on at any hour of the day or night. Somebody to stand by you. Somebody to accompany you. Somebody to help design your calendar for you. And now there was none of that. There was simply a sense of aloneness, of, oh, I now have to tackle this by myself. And it was very odd. She wasn't comfortable with that because she'd not really known it. If you remember, I did Prince Philip's pictures after he died. If you didn't see them, they're on the Soul Crossings channel. But he, in this pictorial chamber thing, he had a smaller chamber he went into and waited. And his consciousness was geared to being special, being waited on, being greeted, being elevated in some way. None of which exists after you cross over. And after he waited and waited and waited in that particular cavity, and nobody came, he was forced to accept that, no, he had to do this under his own steam. Nobody was coming. And a similar thing happened with the Queen, except that his was about privilege and hers was about cooperation and duty and meaningful activity. She had that cord attached to her back wherever she went. Even as she tackled the slope of the tunnel, which felt like a bit of a hike actually to her, the cord remained. And when she reached the light, once again, because she felt slightly better, obviously, because the physical was removed, she was no longer mortal, she thought, I don't want to go. I surely don't have to go. This pull of duty and responsibility and importance, not self-importance, but importance, wouldn't leave her to the very last minute. But of course, there is momentum. There is a current. Even somebody like a monarch has to go with that. They are, in the end, mortal. All the monarchy stuff, all the titles, the money, the palaces, you leave them behind. That's what Egyptian pharaohs found. Doesn't matter what they bury you with. It doesn't matter what's in your tomb. You can't take any of it with you, including your title, your privileges, the way people revere you. There's none of that when you transition. And she stared at the light, and I think it jarred with her. She was a Christian as head of a church, the Church of England, but she was a Christian of the old time sense, I think. Like worshipping a superior being kind of thing, rather than realizing that you are one with all that is. So instead of considering herself as rejoining the whole, she was confused about meeting God, or where God was, or even her position in the hierarchy, having been queen. It was quite odd. An odd sensation, plus the aloneness of having to tackle this without people there to escort her. As I said, there's a current. And she eventually stepped into the light. And she was gone. But the cord was left in the chamber, on the floor. Her duty was over. Dying felt like just one more thing she had to do. The last thing she had to do. Relinquishing her role on the mortal side. But I think she also realized in these final seconds before stepping into eternity, the difference between external power vested in you by humans and the internal power that you have anyway by virtue of being a perfect divine being and a soul in the universe. I think she got that simply by the aloneness of the hike up the tunnel. She began to realize that all that other stuff, it was just stuff. And now she had access to something far greater, far more empowering than anything she'd had in life. And there was both humility. Unlike with Prince Philip, there was no humility there. With her, there was humility, but also maybe disappointment that she didn't have that ultimate power to turn back and return to life. That was denied her. But in the end, she was just one more person passing into the light. And everything else was left behind. It's very, very powerful. And really hit home with me, which is something I didn't expect. So now we move on to another monarch, and that'll be very, very interesting. But it comes at a time of great change in Britain, which is bobbing along the bottom in so many ways right now. In Britain, in America, and the rest of the world. I did pictures for the British monarchy quite a long time ago. And it was like a warehouse in Indiana Jones with lots of crates piled up. And the monarchy could either go down a little alleyway and get stuck and stay in the old ways, in which case it would become obsolete and die. Or it could change direction, go left, something new, and then move on in a different way. Grow, adapt, become something new for a new age. And that's what it seemed to do in the pictures. And that's, again, where we are now. All these sets of pictures have come together with the death of the Queen. As I say, if you're not British, it's probably a little hard to understand why this is such an emotional moment, but it really is. Somebody who was a mainstay of our lives for decade after decade after decade is no longer there. And we're alone. As strange as that seems. All right, guys. Thanks very much for watching. I appreciate it. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.